So you may hear, we are live, we are recording. So it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce a young woman who I had the pleasure of meeting several years ago. We were in a long-term training program together. We both attended several FASD conferences where we had the chance to meet in person, as well as gather on coaching calls on a weekly basis. I'm thrilled to say that I'm lucky enough that we actually became friends. I don't know if she'll admit that, but I'll admit that. And I finally had the pleasure of meeting her two incredible kiddos just last year. So, with no further ado, I am thrilled to announce our first guest speaker for Harrison's Hope 2025 speaker series, Angela Freeman. It's all yours, hun. Take us in, bring us home.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Angela, and I'm an alcoholic. Oh, wait. Wrong meeting. Sorry. Sorry, I just sometimes forget where I am. No, I am I'm a birth mother and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 37 months. And I want to share with you my story of becoming a birth mom in recovery and a fierce advocate for my children. I want to share kind of my journey and hopefully offer some hope for folks who might be struggling. I understand we have a varying audience, whether you're a birth parent or you're providing support for caregivers or kinship. This hopefully my message will come across to everybody, and you'll be able to get something from it.
Sorry, hon, I'm not very social tonight. I'm on my third webinar.
Sorry, Susan, can I ask you to mute? Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Mary, I don't know if you wanted to make me co-host or if we're
You should be able to share your screen if you click on
okay.
share.
Okay, great. You know, I've only been working from home for about 4 years, so Zoom is
Well, and they're always changing it on us
right.
too, right? Just to really
Yes.
mess with things. So there we
Okay.
go.
So can you see my screen? Okay, great.
We can see a fabulous ruby corn.
You you can't, is it Ruby or is it, oh, that's, see, I did that wrong. Oh, that's
That's
my
okay.
daughter, Ruby. I'll introduce you to her in a minute. Um, Three screens. It's a wonder I don't have a third eye coming out of the middle of my forehead. So, how's that?
There we go.
Better.
Winner, winner,
Okay.
chicken dinner.
Okay. Okay. So my story is called The Unicorn and the Sage. As we go along, I hope you'll feel the passion in which I describe my children, and it is kind of for me a fairy tale and kind of a story that sounds like something out of an amazing Lifetime movie. Um, and just want to give credit to one of my community group members. She's an artist. She's co-written books, and she just, just from learning about my children through coaching calls or other calls, she created this cartoon for me. And so this is my son, the sage, and this is my daughter, the unicorn. And so I want to introduce you to my family. I want to share what our family kind of looked like, what happened, what it's like now, and then just some common strategies. Not so much that that you would need to take notes with, but these are just kind of thoughts that come to me periodically throughout my day that just remind me either why I'm doing what I'm doing or how do I get through whatever violent shitstorm is coming next, pardon my French. And then at the end we're going to have some questions if anybody wants to ask me anything. You should know a couple of things. I am an open book. My part of my healing and part of recovery is about being honest. And um, I've always been an open book. There's no question that I feel would be off limits. Um, my children are aware of their disability. They know how it happened. So we are very, very open in our household about, neurotypical versus neurodiverse. And we have this crazy, dark, odd humor that, only we think is funny, but it's really normalized in our household. So that's my perspective, which means when it comes to question, there's really, for me, nothing off limits. And I do come from, recovery and alcoholism, but I understand that it can happen even if you're not an alcoholic, right? And part of what my message is that um, I'm trying to help educate and reduce stigma and inform and debunk some myths because a lot of people think that, what causes this is somebody that's, laying in a gutter with a bottle wrapped in a paper bag. And hopefully by the time I'm done sharing my story, yes, I was an alcoholic, but I wasn't, in a gutter. My rock bottom was not death row or anything like that. And it can take one drink. There's no safe amount of alcohol. And the other thing I'll say is that I understand that other substances that, they usually want to talk about alcohol and other substances hand in hand. I don't speak to other substances a whole deal, a whole big deal, because that's not where my perspective is. I do understand that other substances can cause issues. I just don't have the lived experience to really talk about them. I will say that from what I've researched and what I've learned, alcohol does appear to be more detrimental to an unborn fetus than drugs, and I think that's also kind of a misnomer that people have heard. So my perspective is, as a recovering alcoholic, I focus on alcohol. But I also know that there's other stuff out there, and that's okay too. Again, I'm hopefully you will see my experience, strength, and hope as it relates to FASD as well as the other journey that I'm on. So, if that makes sense, I will continue. So these are my babies, and I have to just try not to cry. So my son, Elias, he's 12 years old, and my daughter, the unicorn. And they kind of look even like this. They look like a unicorn in a sage. Um, so just a little bit about me and them. I've lived in upstate New York my whole life. I've always been a hard worker. I've pretty much been taking care of myself since I was 12 years old. I told my mom when I was 3 years old that I wanted to be an accountant. When I graduated from high school, I went to college and for accounting. I got out of college. I became a CPA. I put myself through college. And I did all of the things in the normal course of the way that everything was supposed to happen. Um, I have three other siblings. My parents have been married for 54 years. And so, the typical, four kids, two parents. I always say I have the original ones I was shipped with. But, and so generally speaking, everything seemed pretty normal. My father has not taken a drink in 40 years. But he's what one would call a dry drunk. Um, And we always knew growing up that my dad chose every day not to drink, but it was never something that was talked about like, hey, you really shouldn't do this. And the risks are XYZ. It was never really talked about. I was raised in a religious home. I went to Christian school until middle of ninth grade. Then I went to public school. And so, having that background and the religious spin to things, everything was seemingly normal. But alcoholism did run in my family, and it was just something that nobody really talked about. I ended up, I got out of college, I got my CPA, I started my career, and then eventually I married a man who I had known since I was 16 years old. And so, friend of the family, everything was great. He was a recovering drug addict in that he had been clean for about 8 years. But I've known his family for years and years, and he had a lot of challenges. Um, but by the time we reconnected, he had been sober for 8 years. So I really thought that he was out of the woods. At that time, I drank socially, it was really no big deal. And we decided to start a family, and we were married for just a short period of time, and he kind of went back to his roots. And 2 weeks before my son Elias was born, he left. He had been finding some other friends who shared his penchant for drugs and heroin. And so 2 weeks before my son was born, he was gone. So you can imagine, didn't see that coming. So he wasn't around at all. He didn't have a relationship with my son, and here I am, college educated. By then, I was the controller of a large university, so I worked in finance. And here I am with a newborn baby and a single mother, and I was just blown away. Had no idea that could have possibly happened. And so that's when my drinking started a little bit more. And I did have a few drinks when I was pregnant with my son, but I didn't think anything of it. Um, I was either too early in my pregnancy, and then later, like the last month of my pregnancy, kind of right before my husband left me, and I was struggling a bit. By then I was like, oh, well, he's fully cooked. This is not going to affect him at all, right? So his exposure was limited, but throughout the whole process, nobody, my doctors or pediatricians, nobody asked me, or if they did, what's your history? What's your, do you have any mental health issues? Do you have this? Do you have a family history of alcoholism? Nobody asked me that because I'm a professional woman and I was independent, and I just didn't fit kind of the idea of what people thought of mothers who do this to their children, right? And I put that in air quotes because we don't do this to our children. Um, we didn't know what we didn't know, but now that we know better, we do better, right? So I was never asked. I was never questioned at all whether I had had a history of alcohol or substance abuse. So, um, my son, he was an amazing little boy. He was just so, it was just him and I. And, I was going through some stuff, but he slept through the night from the time he was 6 weeks old. He was born 8 pounds, 20 inches long. He was due on July 1st. He was born July 2nd. He wasn't underweight, overweight, nothing. So there were really no markers that there was anything wrong. And that's how we proceeded. When he was 22 months old, I decided that I wanted to have another baby, and there was no relationship on the horizon. And I said, you know what? I've been taking care of myself for this long. I'm gonna just do this on my own. I went to the hospital, the fertility clinic, and I said, I want to have another baby. Yes, I have supports. And they said, okay. And I went through the process and was artificially inseminated, and I had my daughter. Again, at the time, it was like, well, they have you do like 1 hour of, counseling to make sure you're not nuts. And then I went through the process. And my daughter, um, she started causing me angst from the second I learned I was pregnant. It was very touch and go, and I won't go into that whole story, but everything about her arrival was just like, oh my goodness, this girl's going to be the death of me, right? Um, and by then I had been drinking a little bit more. I was drinking daily by then, but it was like, a couple, 3, 4 beers, maybe just to help me sleep because with my marriage falling apart and just everything that I had going on, I just wanted to take the edge off, or I didn't sleep very well. So I would just have a couple of beers, no big deal. Beer in my mind wasn't going to do anything to hurt the fetus. So I wasn't doing the hard stuff. So I thought it was okay. But I was by then drinking daily. And so I had my daughter in 2014, and she was very different from my son. Very different. She's 10 years old, and I still don't think that she slept through the night, right? So I go from having this little boy who's been sleeping through the night since he was 6 weeks old to having my daughter. But she was also born reasonably on time. She was, maybe a pound or so less than him. But height and growth and benchmarks and so on and so forth, all of that met the marks. So there was no real idea that there was anything wrong then either. Um, and so as she started getting a little older, 2, 2.5, she was a little moody. I didn't feel that she and I had a connection really. And I was constantly trying to figure out what was wrong. I didn't know if it was because I was married to his father and she was just, half of her was unknown. I didn't know if it was because she was the second child and I was completely exhausted. I didn't know if it was just a mama's boy thing versus very strong-willed woman who I was going to have to focus her energy. I didn't know what it was, but I definitely felt that there was a bit of a different connection with her and I. Um, and she was just crazy. Yeah, like I loved her. Um, and but she just, she didn't like to be cuddled. She didn't like to be touched. She wasn't very lovey. My son was just like all over me. It was just very, very different. And she was always, always on the go. And then there were times where she would just stop, face plant, and she'd be sleeping, right? So it was just very, very different. And she never seemed to listen. But so I definitely knew that she was a, unicorn farting rainbow sprinkles. And I was just like, whoa, this girl's out of left field. But that's my baby. So as far as what it was like, this is what it was like. Um, my son started to develop pretty early on. He was very quirky. He had some just, it was hard for me to tell like what's normal toddler stuff and what is just like, whoa, something's wrong. But they both were very, very smart. And again, meeting all the benchmarks, but it was just a whirling dervish. Everything was just like, I didn't know which way was up. And of course, you can imagine how that was helped by my daily drinking. Um, but as they started getting older, my daughter started eloping a lot more. That would increase my anxiety. Of course, my anxiety was also helped along by my daily drinking. I was waking up a lot of times, still hungover, but in my mind, I was functional, right? And I used to I say I was a functional alcoholic until I wasn't, right? And this went on for quite a long period of time. And as far as school went, they both tested pretty early, and she tested immediately for having ADHD, and I was like, yeah, no shit, right? Um, and so that was her first diagnosis, and so but then he tested, and everybody and he met the benchmarks for IQ. Both of them have very high IQ. Um, and but he had anxiety and he just worried about everything. And I was like, oh, great, buddy. I'm so sorry. I've had ulcers since I was 8. I've had anxiety, but back then you didn't have parents that cared how you felt. So I just kept it all inside. And so I was like, I'm sorry, buddy. I gave you my anxiety, right? So eventually we got his anxiety starting to get managed and her ADHD was starting to get managed-ish. And still no sleeping through the night. And but then the older she got, the more defiant she got, and the little stronger that she got, and the scrappier she got, and really, really scrappy, and the more destructive she got. And I was just like, I don't even know what's going on. And there was a point in time where I believed that she hated me. And frankly, I was not a fan of hers either. Ultimately, and I'm finding that my life story is a little longer or than I thought it was, but
Okay.
ultimately, my son told me one night, he said, Mommy, when I find you asleep in your chair, it makes me so anxious that I throw up in the middle of the night. And so this whole time, for a couple of years, I had him in therapy about trying to help him with his anxiety. And that was the first time I really learned that I was not helping with his anxiety. He was worried about me. He was fearful. He would find me falling asleep in my chair every night. And so that was kind of the first aha moment. And in December of 2021, I ended up checking myself into a treatment center. I thought I was going to go in for 5 days. And they recommended that I stay longer for the full 28. And so I did. And so I say a miracle happened, and I was developing this slide, and I was like, well, what was it? Was it a light bulb moment? Was it lightning strike? What is it? The skies opened up? Was it a miracle? It's all of those things, and this is not from a religious perspective, but something happened. My son has always been the sage, an old soul, and the fact that this little boy felt brave enough to tell me how he felt, I think that speaks a lot to the relationship that I did have with him, even though I wasn't 100% present all the time. But he told me, and I was miraculously able to hear what he was saying and start to do something about it. And do something about it I did. So my sobriety date is December 17th, 2021. And when I got home, it took me a little while to clear the cobwebs. And right around then, my daughter Ruby started having some real significant issues in school. And um, so in September of that year, so mid second grade, I was getting a phone call every day. And I was like, I can't, I can't, I'm trying to stay sober. I'm trying to stay sober, and I'm trying to do my program of recovery, and I'm trying to fix work that I had been screwing up for, however long I had been drinking. And, I was just trying to do all these things. And I'm getting a phone call every single day about my daughter, who's just this little thing, she's what, 7, 8 years old. And she's just like leaving the school ground, taking off, running and hiding in lockers. They can't find her for hours. And I was like, something is not right. Um, so in September of that year, I mentioned to her pediatrician, I said, I'm wondering if well, first I said something to her therapist, and her therapist was like, well, yeah, I think you might be onto something, because her therapist knew about my recovery, or my intended recovery. And so she says, if I were you, I would get a referral from the pediatrician. So I said something to her pediatrician. I had an appointment within a couple of days, and she was like, well, are you her birth mom? And I said, well, yeah. And she goes, well, did you drink when you were pregnant? And I said, well, yeah. And she goes, oh, yeah, I guess I could see the soft markers. And I was just like, what? So, I immediately felt judged. I immediately felt like I wished I hadn't said anything. The process for getting my daughter evaluated was a very long one, and it was not helped by her pediatrician. They ended up referring me to University of Rochester with Dr. Christie and Lynn Cole, who's like the Mecca. I'm so grateful every day that I live where I live. Um, and so I started that process. It took about 9 months. At the same time, I found FASD Success, and I met Mary. And I started going through this coaching class where I was just learning how to parent my children. And it was like every day, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. And I was like, okay, okay, okay. So I went from my daughter hating me, to and destroying everything, eloping, and I just shifted my mindset, and I was like, oh my God, her brain is on fire. And it was like a switch. And once I was able to just change my expectations and meet her where she was at, so my daughter never told me that she loved me. Even if I would say it to her, she would never say it back. And it was like, there's my little girl, right? When she was 8.5 years old, after I started applying some of these strategies and really just changing my whole way of parenting, within 2 months, she told me that she loved me. And I was like, oh my God. Now, mind you, she did tell me she loved me by writing with black Sharpie on the hallway wall, in my home. And it's still there because I was like, she said it for the first time. Like, I'm not going to get rid of it.
Put a
So,
picture frame
but
on it, and
what's that?
put a picture frame on
I
it.
know, I know. So, I there are so many things that's happened in the last 2.5 years. I had to go into the school, and I had to learn my rights. I had to, and I'm still fighting, actually. Don't get me started on school. Um, but I learned what the law was. I learned that I needed a team. Um, and basically, if you're not on my team, then I have no time for you. You're done. So as soon as I got her diagnosis, I switched pediatricians because the one I had was not supportive. So she's gone. And I just started kind of surrounding myself with only people who really get it and are willing to help me. Anybody who has unsolicited parenting advice, I got no time for that. And I really just started kind of keeping our circle small so that I could help them be successful. Um, this is a picture of so my daughter has done equine therapy for 3 years, right? So I've learned in this process that traditional therapies don't work. And so I needed to focus on the things that she was good at. Somebody said equine therapy. I was like, this girl is not safe. She's not going to be able to do this. But I put her in equine therapy, and I was amazed. She ended up graduating from the therapeutic program because she outpaced the curriculum, and they would never, like, she's able to do things for some reason. This girl that elopes and doesn't dress herself every day, and her executive functioning and adaptive functioning is just in the toilet. For some reason, she can get on this 1,000-pound horse and just nail it. She has a way of understanding what they're doing. And so she's successful at that. So that's what we do. So one of her big things was, mommy, can we go horseback riding as a family? So we did that. And I'm gonna talk about, so these are the strategies or kind of thoughts or feelings that I've had throughout this process that I really try and bring to, whether I'm talking to birth mothers or a school or anyone, cashier at the gas station, anyone who will listen to me talk about this stuff. This is what I try and tell them. FASD is not a death sentence, and supported, our kids will thrive, right? I always have to think brain first, symptoms, not behaviors. And if they can, they will. I truly believe that no kid wants to wake up and say, "Oh, I want to be a jerk today." And as far as the birth mother guilt or shame, I can't change what's been done. And given the fight that I have ahead of me, it's not a good use of my energy. And so I've really kind of been able to compartmentalize. I'm not avoiding it, because for my recovery, I still have to have some honesty around that. But it's not a good use of my energy to fret and worry and freak out about it. And I do take a strength-based relational approach with both of them. So, one thing I didn't mention is, after my daughter got her diagnosis, so now she has FASD, and then under that umbrella, she has ADHD. She has significant anxiety, separation anxiety. Actually, I that came out after I got home from treatment. She wouldn't get away from me. And I was like, I didn't even think you liked me. What's happening? But she had become so fearful when I was gone for that period of time. So now she has significant separation anxiety. Um, I had her ODD diagnosis removed. She has ARFID, which is just like picky eater. She eats three things, and it's like chocolate, candy, and ice cream. And so that's about it for her diagnosis, I believe. And then my son, I said, well, as long as I'm here, as long as I have this place, this diagnostic place, I might as well get my son diagnosed or tested to see if he has it as well, because I really wasn't sure. He doesn't present the same way that my daughter does. He originally had ADHD, anxiety, depression, and ultimately was diagnosed with FASD and level 1 autism. So we say that his autism kind of dials down his FASD, which is why he's completely different from his sister. But he also has PTSD from my drinking, and so we're working through that. And so how they present is kind of completely different. So you can imagine how fun that is when you're trying to like mediate both kind of spectrums. But particularly with my daughter, I have to take a harm reduction approach. If there's something unsafe, she will do it. Whether it's, cutting knives, saws, falling, just so I really spend a lot of time focusing on, yes, you can do this, and I'm going to teach you how to do it safely. Or yes, you can do this, and I'm going to supervise you. So with her, it's heavy, heavy supervision, but she's also gotten better at articulation of like, mommy, I was having an intrusive thought and I was going to cut the cat's hair, but I wanted to come and tell you instead. I'm like, that's awesome. That's a great reason for me to get out of bed at 5 in the morning. I'm so proud of you for not cutting the cat's hair. And then the other thing, we have all these ideas of how parenting is going to be. And when I was really first starting out, and still now that we're at a steady state, I focus on food, water, sleep, meds, emotional and physical safety, and my daughter would add glitter and chocolate. If there is anything else outside of that, I can't worry about it. I don't worry about it. Hair brushing, not so much. Teeth, yeah, we'll eventually have issues. but it's not these are not the hills to die on. I choose the hills to die on, and see bullet point up above. Food, water, sleep, meds, emotional and physical safety. I had a significant amount of school refusal, and a lot of it was around emotional safety. Um, and she started wanting to stay home with me because of the separation anxiety. So I learned I had to kind of try and create an environment at school that was like being home with mom, only at school. I've since filed 2 state complaints and I'm in the middle of a due process hearing, but after 2.5 years, the district finally placed her out of district, and she is in an amazing 611 classroom. I call it Unicorn Academy. She's thriving, she's crushing it. Her academics are through the roof. She's maxing out on the amount of points she gets in a day. She's not eloped. She's not being physically aggressive. She's not acting like a horse. She's not doing all of the things that the other district was like, you got to come get her. She's out of her mind, right? So it's that emotional and physical safety for her really is a focus of mine. And then I have to practice gratitude. And that's not like me because I've never really been kind of a positive person ever. I have years and years of trauma growing up myself, and 25 years of therapy, and I can almost tolerate people now, but sobriety and seeing my kids flourish and seeing what a mom I've been able to be, and seeing the spectrum and seeing what other challenges families face, and then looking at my family, I say, you know what, it could always be worse. I could be facing XYZ, and so far so good. So I practice gratitude. It keeps me grounded. um and that's what I got for you. I do want to thank Mary and Caroline for inviting me. This has been one of the most exciting things to say. I am now an international speaker um, at Harrison's Hope. And I also want to mention Barb Clark. She's one of my mentors. She's an FASD educator, advocate, parent support training specialist. And then my contact information is there, or Mary also knows how to get a hold of me. So are there any questions from anybody?
So this is a fabulous time for me to say, Angela, you nailed it. I knew you
Thank
would.
you.
Um, Folks, if you have questions, please feel free to use your react button, the little heart, so that you can put your hand up if you've got a question that you'd like to ask out loud. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat. We do have a comment in there already, and I do have to say I agree with it. It says, "You're so amazing, Angela. You are a warrior mama," and I would tend to agree with that statement. Um, Angela, your story resonates. You've shared, some really intimate details of your own personal struggles and that aha moment, that miracle where things clicked for you and you recognized that change was needed.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think? And I know this is a loaded question, but what do you think is the first area to really tackle? So some of our families, for example, whether their children came to them from an adoptive perspective or a fostering perspective, or their bio moms, because we
Mhm.
support many different types of families, um,
Mhm.
where's the tipping point of being that squeaky wheel and not getting what you need in any area, be it school or the community? Um, what is it that helped you change the trajectory for your daughter? I know what you did at home,
Right.
but how did you successfully advocate for your kids outside of the home? I guess that's really the nugget I'm trying to get to.
So that's a great question. So the first thing I did was just learned everything I could, and I'm sure there's way more, but it was learning what I could about this disability and, you know, preparing and providing the strategies at home.
Yeah.
And so where I found myself was, okay, I saw this work in my home and school, you're calling me, right? So all I have to do is share with you this amazing gift that I have, right? And then you'll stop calling me, right? Because when somebody's calling me, I assume they're asking for my help. And so that's where it started like, okay, school, all you have to do is this and this and this. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh, you don't know? So that's where I started, oh, well, 1 in 20, 1 in 14, and it's this. And this is what I've seen work at home. And I've tried to share with them, this is what it was like 2 years ago, and this is what it's like now. So all you have to do is listen to me. So, she had a 504, and ultimately I fought for an IEP, and that was hard fought. And then in her IEP, I listed all the things that I wanted. Um, and ultimately, I don't even know if I can remember the second thing, but the biggest thing after all of the things, 10 things I asked for, um, I settled on, will you make sure that everybody who touches my daughter at school gets FASD training? If you give me nothing else,
That was your number
I want
one.
it in her IEP. And that kind of started my advocacy because I said, well, you could use this entity, you could use this entity, or you could, you know what, if you're not going to do any of that stuff, I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll do it because not only do I know the stuff, I've taken the class, I've paid for the stuff, I have the information, but it's also my daughter, right? So I knew that having a birth mother lived experience, um, hopefully could have compelled them to pay attention. And I fought and fought, and I was like, why do you think I'm doing this? I said, do you realize that every time I come in here, I'm throwing myself under the bus? I'm telling you, I created a problem, and I understand that I'm asking you to fix it, right? By helping my daughter, but the reality is this is why she wants to stay home, because I've created a safe environment for her at home. And if you can just help me translate that into her school day, then we're cooking with gas, right? And some, in varying degrees, some did and some didn't. But out of everything, I did ask for that. Let's get some training, everybody who touches my daughter. And then because the idea was that they were just going to be so on fire about what I taught them, that then every teacher in this school would want to know about FASD. And I just continue to bring to them the statistics, 1 in 20, which I know FASD United just put something out that now says 1 in 14. And I just provide like the basic information. And, in 2019, the CDC did a study, and they said 1 in 9 women have confirmed alcohol use during pregnancy. And then in 2021, that number is 1 in 7.
Yeah.
And so I'm a numbers person. So I just said there has to be more than 1 in 20. And when I say that to educators, they say, what's your class size? It's 18 to 20 kids. Do you think that my daughter and my son at the middle school are the only 2 kids in this whole district? Right. So it started with me developing a slide deck for the schools. And then from there, I've just tried to, like I said, I'll tell anybody and everybody who will listen. I've just tried to share that information, and working with making connections with you folks and other folks from the community. It's just, it's my passion, and it helps my family's healing. Like I said, my kids know about their diagnosis, and they have become quite little advocates for their self, particularly my son. My son is like a little lawyer. He's a little old curmudgeon. Um, and I would always say, I said, 1 in 20 kids, and he says, "That we know of, mommy." And I'm
I
like,
love it.
"Yes, that we know of." So, and it's normalizing it, but on the other side of it, outside of advocacy, I started with the basics of sleep. I realized that my daughter was pretty much sleep deprived for the first 8 years of her life.
Yes.
Once I got that kind of managed, the symptoms were already starting to improve, right? So in terms of that food, water, meds, sleep, emotional, and physical safety, sleep was a huge, huge deal for us. Once she was rested,
Yeah.
it already started, things were clicking, and then, encouraging her to use her voice and knowing that she could feel safe telling me something and that I was going to respond and advocate, or, it just created safe spaces for her to do that. But yeah, and obviously as a birth mother, I'm trying to work with University of Rochester, um, to work with pediatricians to reduce stigma,
Hmm.
and I really try and focus with birth mothers, like, you didn't know what you didn't know,
Hmm.
but um
You can't
beating
change
yourself
the
up,
past,
yeah,
but
beating yourself up about it is not going to do anything. You need to save that energy for the hard work you're going to have to do. So,
yeah,
really just, and I can say that because I've done that, and
yeah. You've
it's
walked
necessary.
You've
Yeah.
walked a lot. So,
Yeah.
Angela, Lisa put a great comment, and this is a question that we often get. Um, how did you help improve your daughter's sleep? What do you think
Okay.
was the secret there in improving her sleep patterns?
Okay. So the first thing I did was I took her to an ENT to make
Mhm.
sure that she didn't have obstructive sleep apnea. I had no idea that a child could have
Yes.
sleep apnea. I know I have sleep apnea, but I didn't know that children could, and I didn't realize that it can be pretty common. And so the ENT said, nope, her tonsil size is fine. From there, we did a sleep study because I remember Googling. So, one time, like, oh, can a toddler have restless leg? Like, I remember Googling that because the motor in her mind just still working even when she was sleeping. And
That's
so
right.
I took her for a sleep study, and to determine what those patterns were. And so I had been using melatonin and I was using trazodone, and she would blow through that like it was nobody's business. And trazodone for me was, they used it on me in rehab. They used it on everybody in rehab. That's enough tranquilizer to kill a moose.
Yeah,
And
it
and this
drops
girl's
elephants.
like, and I was like, oh my God. So we switched to clonidine, but that was not something that
No.
ever her pediatrician was telling me she needs to make sure she's in her own bed. She needs to get
Yeah.
12 hours of sleep. She needs to do this and do the. No, she doesn't. She actually doesn't. She functions perfectly fine on around 6.
Yeah.
And
Because there's
so
so
it
much
was.
undisturbed sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once it's quality, she's
Yes.
good. She wakes up 3, 4 in the morning and she's ready to start the day. But the right med, she does zero point 0.1 milligram of clonidine, no melatonin, no trazodone. We have a decent comfort routine that
Yeah.
we do, just kind of helps wind it down. And then that was a game changer.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to throw in there just because sleep is so incredibly important. We all know none of us function well when we don't get quality sleep. And
Hmm.
I agree with you. Our loved ones with FASD, their brains are constantly going awake or asleep. And it's to slow the mind down so then the body can also rest. Some
Yeah.
of our guys are heavy duty sensory seekers. So I know my guy, we take a weighted blanket when we travel, and we have one on his
Mhm.
bed at home, and we have one at the cottage, and that sensory tactile weight on him. When I did an occupational therapy sensory assessment with him, they call him the more kid. They ask him to do 5 push-ups and he does 50 because it
Right.
feels good.
Yeah.
And weighted things for him are huge. So I always encourage any caregiver who is struggling with sleep and quality of sleep for their loved ones that sleep studies are really helpful, but there's other things you can
Mhm.
do while you're waiting for those results. And it's, getting a sensory assessment done and finding out, does your child need more, i.e. weighted blankets, or less? Some kids, we
Right.
bundle them up in their heavy duty fleecy pajamas and slippers and, 6 blankets on them, and they can't fall asleep because it's
Right.
too
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I think what I heard you say throughout this evening was you really became an in-tuned detective with your kids, right? You figured out
Yes.
what was working at home, and then you were able to go out to the community, the school, and say, here's what I need you to do to be successful with my kids.
Yeah.
And you can't do that unless you've done that homework, that detective work to sort out. Because, like you say, you have 2 kiddos that are yours and they are opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Hmm.
What works for one
Yeah.
of them will not necessarily work for the other. So, Lisa,
Yeah.
thank you for asking that question. It's a really, really important one. Um, Angela, would love the opportunity to invite you to come back. And I think it would be an amazing evening if we could talk around your experience with school advocacy, how you secured getting an IEP and an identification, and what's it look like when things don't go well dealing with a school, and how do you overcome that? Because that's another, gosh, we could do a workshop for a whole day on that.
Yeah.
um, is that something you'd be willing to come back and join us for?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. I can tell you, I know more education law,
Yeah.
because it's one thing to say, oh, my little girl needs this, and look like an emotional mom versus I know what the law is and you are in violation. And oh yeah, I know I have a full-time job, but this is so important to my daughter's emotional, mental, physical, spiritual well-being that I'm going to keep pushing it. And I think a lot of what happens, I mean, there a lot of what happens is it takes so long and it's so hard that
Absolutely.
parents just stop and they
Yeah.
say, well, this is what the school is giving us, so let's move on. And I haven't stopped and I'm not stopping. And my goal was always like get your daughter set and then, help the masses.
Yep.
And that's still where I'm at because I could say my daughter's placed somewhere and she's successful. I'm moving on. I have other things to do. But I know that there's a pattern at my district, and I know that there are no other mothers at my district who know what I know
Yes.
and who are willing to put in the time and effort and energy, as painstaking as it is, to change a system that is broken.
Yes.
And it is broken. So I'm not just out for, helping my children. I need it to change for other kids too, because these are the critical times, right? My daughter's in fifth grade.
Yeah.
K-5 is critical.
Yeah.
And
The
and
earlier
it's
the supports, the
yeah,
better the outcomes, right?
yeah,
And you're living proof, and your amazing kids are living proof that you can, it's not a death threat. It's not a life sentence.
No,
No, you
no.
don't outgrow FASD like some professionals like to tell us. Um,
Mhm.
but the reality is you can thrive. You can have a quality of life. You can be a participating member of society that gives back, right?
Yeah,
It's not what you've done in the past, it's what you do going forward. And you're instilling all of that in your kiddos on top of getting them the supports and the safety and the security that every kid's entitled to, right? So
yeah,
to me, I
yeah.
applaud you. I've
Thank
told you
you.
this countless times before. I'm in awe of you. I have nothing but
Thank you.
respect. I love your turnaround story. And you're very inspirational. And
Thank
it's
you.
it's funny. I can always tell on calls, the folks that are the most compelling are the ones that there's very few questions, if any, because they're just still drinking in what you've shared. So that's tremendous. The offer that I will make to those that are on the call tonight, it never fails for me. 15 minutes after I end a meeting, I go, oh, I should have asked. So, Angela, with your permission, I'm
Mhm.
going to suggest that if folks do have follow-up questions, is it okay if they email them to me and you and I
Absolutely.
connect and go through those questions, and
Absolutely.
share the questions and the responses out to the invited attendee or registered folks list.
Okay.
And yeah, we'd love to have you back. I think having an American component, because we do have folks registered from North America. So
Hmm.
we have some Canadians, we have some Americans, and we can share both perspectives on
Hmm.
a future call. And I
Yeah.
think there's a tremendous amount of value in that.
Yep.
And as time goes on and your kiddos are transitioning to high school, and let's say they're transitioning on into what it looks like outside of public school, whether it's university, college, trades, whatever. We'd love to be along for the ride and
Yeah.
continue to hear your story. We
Yeah.
are just at 9:03. Again, I
Okay.
am so grateful for your time and your
Thank you
wisdom.
so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're a
Thank
compelling
you.
lady. We thank you. And
Thank you.
one comment here I have to share. A couple of people said, thanks so much for this. I have to jump off. Another comment, Angela, you are amazing. You are such an inspiration and a great role model for all of us.
Thank
Couldn't agree
you. I
more.
appreciate it.
So
Right.
thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. I'm going to end the recording.